All right, I think we'll see a few additional participants join us, but I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, and we can go ahead and get started. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to join us for this session. I know how busy we all are. If your calendar looks anything like mine, I know it takes a lot to actually carve out the time to join meetings like this. So I really appreciate everyone making the time to join us. This is the second session that we're conducting. We had the first session on Tuesday. The format is essentially the same, but we did update some of the questions just based on what we heard in the session on Tuesday. After this session wraps up, we'll be working on pulling together a summary of everything that we heard, as well as at least a record of the raw input that we received through the chat feature, and sharing that out more broadly, one, as a way to keep folks informed, and also to hold us accountable. I think sharing about the feedback that we received and letting other folks know about that will help to keep us on track to make sure that we're focusing on equity and inclusivity throughout the program development process. So let's go ahead and jump in. Again, for folks who are joining us now, if you are able to connect your audio, whether that's through your computer if you have a microphone attached, or through your phone, that would be great. There is a hand raising feature that we'll use to unmute people to share your thoughts. Again, would love to hear other voices. I'm sure other participants would as well. If you're not able to connect your audio, you can use the chat feature that's part of Zoom to share your comments, and I'll read those out loud for the rest of the group to hear. And I should probably introduce myself. My name is Julia Kim. I'm with the Local Government Commission. We organize the California Adaptation Forum. And for today's session, I'll provide a high-level update, high-level overview of how we've approached equity and inclusivity in previous forums, and what we're looking at for the 2020 forum. And then from there, there's a series of questions that I'll be posing to the group for input. I'll try to get through the overview somewhat quickly so we maximize the time for discussion. The first session did wrap up half an hour early, so we might be able to get folks out of here before 3:30. So let's jump in. For those of you who are not familiar with CAF, the California Adaptation Forum, it's a biennial conference that we organize. And yeah, the first year was in Sacramento, then to Long Beach, then back to Sacramento, and for 2020 we'll be in Riverside. The main purpose is essentially to gather California's adaptation community, including leaders and practitioners from a diverse range of sectors and disciplines, as you can see up on the screen here, and to provide opportunities for participants to learn about the latest science and policies, tools and resources, connect with other peers to share knowledge and build, further build those connections, and to create mutual support to transition from awareness and planning to adaptation action. And we, of course, do this through a series of plenary and breakout sessions, implementation-focused workshops, tours, and other networking opportunities. And as we start to plan for for each forum, we really want to spend some time reflecting back on, how we did in the previous forum, and to identify opportunities for improvement. Now, thinking about how we've been working to address and include equity issues. The inaugural CAF in 2014, to be fully transparent, we didn't do the best job of making equity front and center. That was a huge lesson learned. And in 2016, we really revamped our planning process. If folks were engaged in the 2016 forum, Jenny Woods, now Jenny Welch, who was with LGC, really did a great job setting up a foundation for us. So that's when we first organized an equity advisory committee, identified some metrics and some goals, and really focused on prioritization, and had a separate, track that was specifically dedicated to climate justice and equity. At last year's forum, we really wanted to focus on integration. So we had an equity and tribal advisory committee, and we really heard from that group Yes, call equity out separately, but really focus on integrating that. So instead of having a separate track, we worked on integrating equity throughout all of the forum tracks and thinking about that throughout the program development process. Now for 2020, we want to take it, we want to continue on this path and focus on mainstreaming. So instead of forming a separate equity committee, we are working to invite those voices to join the main program advisory committee so we can, kind of make decisions together as a group, and looking for ways to further prioritize, integrate, and mainstream equity conversations at the adaptation forum. Before we dive into the discussion, just wanted to provide a quick snapshot of how we did for the 2018 forum. So the next few slides you'll see are some goals that are categorized by content, participation, and engagement, and that's how we structured some of the questions as well. So we had a goal to have equity addressed in each plenary session. We did have the first plenary session focused on social justice and equitable adaptation. It was also discussed in the other two plenary sessions. We also had a goal of having 50% of sessions to include a speaker who could directly address climate impacts for frontline communities. And we did hit that target. So we had 55% with a speaker who could address those issues. And then we had another goal of 80% of sessions to include dedicated time to discuss climate justice and equity. We didn't quite hit that target. So we came in at about 75%. And the 75% doesn't include sessions that, maybe for a portion of a presentation equity was mentioned, or, if the term equity was literally just spoken. We really reflected back on the program and counted the sessions that had dedicated presentations that were really focused on various aspects of equity and adaptation work, or specific discussion time for participants to engage in that discussion. Shifting gears to participation, we know that cost is always a barrier to attending conferences, including the California Adaptation Forum. So we had a goal of raising $25,000 in travel scholarships, exceeded that goal quite a bit, and we were able to bring in $40,500. In terms of demographics and kind of racial, ethnic background, we wanted to aim for 20 to 25% of all attendees from communities of color. We had 24.4%, so towards the upper end of that range of participants who identified with an ethnicity other than white. And this does not include folks who preferred not to disclose their background. And finally, in terms of engagement, and I kind of use that word a bit broadly, just thinking about how we can leverage CAF to really increase understanding of equity issues and encourage kind of deeper engagement in equity. So the first was to provide opportunities for exactly that, for participants to engage in equity discussions. We did organize a workshop specifically for equity leaders and funders. And as I noted, 75% of sessions did include time to discuss equity, or at least present equity, but I think this is a trickier one for us to track. So we'd love to hear input on that. And then the other goal we had was to try to infuse equity information throughout the website and materials. We did try to do that as much as we could. We also developed a specific webpage focused on environmental justice history, and then had a few monthly themes that touched on equitable adaptation and traditional ecological knowledge in our blog series that we had. And you can see up here just a couple quotes from folks after the forum, just kind of highlighting how we've been doing in terms of infusing equity into the forum. So now to shift gears, let me pause actually for a moment, because the next section I'll be just highlighting what we're hoping to get out of the listening session, and then moving on to the questions. Any kind of questions at this stage on anything that I shared up to this point? Feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or feel free to ask a question through the chat or Q&A portal. All right. I don't see hands raised. I don't see any chats or questions coming in. Hopefully that's a good, hopefully it's a sign of that I was comprehensive and not a sign of tuning out. So we'll keep things moving along, but of course, feel free to ask questions at any point in this session. So moving on for the listening session goals, we're conducting these sessions before planning activities launch. The advisory committee has not met yet. We haven't really determined anything in terms of topics to feature, how to proceed with our program development process. So this is really that early, first opportunity for us to gather input. I think, so again, this kind of is structured around the 3 goals in terms of content, participation, and engagement. And we'll also have some time towards the end for open feedback. So before we move on, I have a question from Matt. Were there any critiques of the equity component of the last CAF? Yes, there was, but not the type of critique maybe that I agree with, and maybe one that many of you agree with. We did get a handful of comments that noted that there was too much of a focus on equity, and there was a desire to feature kind of more technical content. So that is something that we do want to keep in mind. We do want to make sure the adaptation forum, responds to the range of different needs of adaptation practitioners, including highlighting technical aspects of projects or strategies, or but at the same time, we want to continue making equity front and center and really mainstreaming that as part of the CAF program and just kind of the overall environment. So yeah, that's a great question, Matt. And then there's a hand raised from, I believe, Reverend Earl Coteen. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I am going to go ahead and unmute you in just a moment. And 3, 2, and 1. Did I do that? Let's see.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Oh, perfect.
And you pronounced my name perfectly. Thank you. The question I'm going to raise is, a lot of the work I do is in the refinery corridor that runs from Richmond to Benicia. And a lot of the inequities are inequities of poverty, not just of color. So I'm just wondering, are you going to have any way of determining how well you are representing communities that are frontline communities, regardless of the racial makeup?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point. And thank you so much for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and lower your hand, but I'll keep you unmuted on my side. And if you could, I'll let you kind of toggle that on and off. So great point it's really kind of, how do we define frontline communities? We do look at that from a racial perspective, as evident in the metrics that we had around participants from communities of color. With that said, we have also included rural communities, low-income communities, people with disabilities. I would say those are kind of the other priority populations that we identified. Just as you noted, it doesn't just boil down to race. There are multiple socioeconomic factors that come into the picture, and rural communities were also included, just given where they sit at in terms of the landscape and with the impacts that we're facing, as well as the oftentimes lack of resources for rural and smaller communities. We did also prioritize tribes as well. Thank you, Leah. She just chatted me to remind me of that. We did want to emphasize tribal engagement and content that would be content focused on sharing out efforts being led by tribal communities, as well as content that was for tribal communities. So our committee last year we made that really explicit in the name of the committee. It was the Equity and Tribal Advisory Committee, because we realized that that was a pretty significant gap in previous years, and just given the importance of engaging tribes. Did that help answer your question, Reverend? And
yeah, it perfectly answered my question, and it sounded like your answer was even more comprehensive than my thinking. I just encourage you, when you're talking about equity or putting it on your slides, that you complexify equity, as you just did a moment ago, around poverty, disability, all sorts of other challenges people face. And I'll mute myself again. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Reverend. And the other thing that I'll note is, I think as the kind of field of practice continues to mature and evolve, and in light of some recent reports that I've just seen personally, I think there are opportunities at CAF to think about how we build the adaptive capacity of communities, and doing that, and as a way of doing that, making sure people can actually meet their basic needs. You know, if you're focused on the next week or the next month and have a million things going on, it's pretty safe to say that they're probably not able to engage in, you know, emergency preparedness or, you know, various climate adaptation aspects. So that's another piece that we'll be considering. We do have another comment coming in from Jim. Congrats on moving climate justice and equity to the program. Thank you. Marginalized communities, and I'll say thank you, and also thanks to everyone else who's been involved in that. It is not something that we would have been able to do without the engagement of you know, all of the folks that we've been engaging with over the past few years. Marginalized communities are and will be hit first and hardest. Does this CAF 2020 effort focus on resiliency to the climate crisis across all communities? Is there already an ongoing conversation that begins to identify the impacts and possible responses? Great question, Jim. Last year is because the way that we structured the program development process, I'll keep this brief. At a very high level, the folks that we invited to develop sessions, we made it a requirement for them to at least tell us how they're going to touch on that, exactly what you noted, just recognizing how different impacts will, you know, be, will negatively impact vulnerable populations and frontline communities the most, how they're really prioritizing those populations. So that was a discussion that was had through, I think, in a lot of those sessions, like the 75% stat that I shared, a lot of those sessions, I would say maybe like a handful of those sessions were sessions that were completely focused on different aspects of equity. I would say the majority of the other sessions were on different topics, but included a presentation or discussion that touched on exactly that, how that effort or project, or how that effort or project is engaging with vulnerable populations and the strategies that they're implementing to kind of help those communities better prepare for and respond to and recover from disasters. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions come in or any other hands raised, so let's go ahead and jump into the questions. I have 6 questions in total. I have like 2 per category and then kind of an open one at the end. So first and foremost, wanted to hear from all of you on the line. What topics are you most interested in seeing covered at the 2020 Adaptation Forum from an equity perspective? So just to get the ball rolling a bit, some things that we heard from the first session, health equity came up, making that climate health connection really clear, not just thinking about the physical side, but mental, emotional, psychosocial. Definitely continuing to feature traditional ecological knowledge and the work that tribes are leading and improving upon what we did last year. I'll kind of just keep it brief there but wanted to call out a couple of examples to get the ball rolling. So yeah, I'm hoping to stop talking too much, and hopefully we'll see some hands going up. If your audio is connected, and I can unmute you. If not, feel free to share some thoughts through the chat. Awesome, thank you, Reverend. Reverend Coteen just shared disaster preparedness as a key topic. Awesome, Matt, I see your hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. Let me see, did that work? You might need to, I think I let you unmute.
All right, did that work?
Oh yeah, yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic, well, thank you, Julia. Yeah, so this is Matt Vanderslice. I've recently joined the staff over at the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative, Bar High, as their lead on climate and community resilience. I think the planned power outages, of course, is a hot topic, and one that's really has some very interesting dimensions from an equity perspective, and it would be fantastic to see that highlighted in this year's adaptation forum. And I think particularly as we think about medically vulnerable populations and how they're addressed during these responses to climate-driven disasters.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. It's a really good point. I've also been hearing from many people the impact of the public safety power shutoffs. We are conducting a survey through LGC. Grace Kaufman is leading that effort, if folks are familiar with her. And yeah, so we're trying to collect some more info on that. So yeah, that's a really good point. And Matt, I'm gonna also keep you unmuted on my end, and I'll lower your hand just so it's easier for you to jump in later on. But if you are able to toggle that mute and unmute on your end when you're not speaking, that would be great. And I think same would apply for everyone else. Okay, I see a few more hands raised. I'm going to try to take these in order. William, I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Yes, thank you. My question is about financing. Financing is going to be government is going to be a bigger and bigger concern over the next the coming decades. One, we have the housing issues. We may get the schools and communities issues solved or funded adequately before then. Then we're going to have climate change, which is going to require an enormous amount of funding. So our current local government funding is primarily from what are called regressive taxes. That is, they don't take into consideration the ability of people to pay them. And so you've got like a parcel tax is the same for a parcel, whether it's $1 million home or it's a small little a one-bedroom trailer on a lot. Although there can be certain categories, but that's not at all unusual. So I would just like to I suggest to consider taking a look at the equity of taxation sources. So you have all the property taxes, parcel taxes, and sales taxes, which are regressive. You have the income and employee taxes that are probably progressive. They're based on people's ability to pay. Even those can be implemented regressively. And then you have the gross revenue, gross receipts taxes, which are kind of neutral on that based on businesses. So I would think it'd be interesting to me if we started to gather data and thinking about how to fund these. This housing is going to cost trillions of dollars in the next couple decades, and I think eventually it's the climate change is going to cost that and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, William. Thank you so much. Financing and funding are always, topics that folks want to see covered. So we'll absolutely do that. And I would say if we always want to balance, we strive to kind of balance out the content between kind of the issues and problems and challenges and then the solutions. So if folks have any suggestions for local financing measures or taxes that you think are not regressive and are more equitably developed, that would be great to kind of balance this point out. So William, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we have a couple more hands raised, and then I'll kind of read out some of the what we've received through the chat. So Allison, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. I'll unmute you now. Allison, are you there? Ah, you're on your phone. Allison, if you chat me what your phone number is, I'll go ahead and I'll unmute you there. And while we wait on that, Eric, I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Hello.
Eric, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Hey, hi. My name is Eric Salvatierra. I'm a student, graduate student in Presidio Graduate School. I am curious to find out if there was any input into the Strategic Growth Council, any of the pilot programs that have come through that type of financing and funding model, and if there were any that were applicable kind of approaches into that kind of branching off that finance piece or funding piece that was asked earlier. Then I have a separate question, but I'll save it for later.
Yeah, for the pilot programs, is that their Transformative Climate Communities project?
Yes.
Or was there, okay.
That was the one that came to mind, yes.
Yeah, I'm not as plugged in with the actual projects part of the TCC program. If there are others on the line who might have the answer to that, feel free to jump in or chat something and I can read that out loud. But while we wait on that, Eric, did you want to share your other comment?
Yeah, so my other comment or question was on the sense of students, the invitation to come into these forums and curious on the outreach for students, either undergrad or graduate. I know that I'm not sure if there was a cost for the adaptation forum, but understand that the conversation around adaptation and the equity and inclusion has been pretty big around the educational centers.
I think you're breaking up a little bit, or maybe that's my connection. Eric, are you there?
Recommend student, I would ultimately recommend this open to kind of my community of individuals who have been themselves working. Can you hear me?
Hi, Eric. Sorry, I kind of lost you a bit. I heard, engaging with students. I might actually, could we hold off on that? Because we'll have a couple questions specifically on on participation and outreach. So I'm gonna tag you back in a couple slides if that's okay.
Thank you.
Let me just make a note to myself so I remember to do that. Okay, and then to answer your first question, Leah from SGC is on the line. Thanks, Leah, for joining us. And she noted that those projects all kicked off last year, so results are not exactly in yet. But Leah, I'll probably follow up with you as we start to shape the program to see if there's anything we can highlight to Eric's point and to William's kind of broader point around financing. Allison, thank you for sharing your phone number with me. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now. Let's see if this works.
Hi, this is Allison.
Perfect. I can hear you. Thanks, Allison.
Great. Hi. So I'm a fellow at the Ocean Protection Council, and I'm really excited to be on this webinar and have this conversation happening before the forum. So thanks all the organizers for putting this together. I was talking to my colleague earlier, just like half an hour ago, and we were talking about sea level rise, which is one of our big topics when talking about climate adaptation, specifically how a lot of our policy focuses more on homeowners and less on renters. And I'd be interested to have in the adaptation forum for next year maybe some topics or discussion around how to support renters and that sort of subset of residences and tenants as compared to homeowners for adaptation.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point. Thanks so much, Allison. All right, we have some comments coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and I guess a lot of you can see some of those comments directly. Yeah, so feel free to send those chats to everyone. But just to summarize, we heard from Reverend Coteen, growing economic and political equity, homelessness and land use. Really good points there. Rebecca notes rural communities, definitely. We have some dittos for the disaster and emergency preparedness, a few comments on that. From Leah, she says, I would want tribal ideas on this before pushing too hard, but some content that the state would be interested in would include scalable and transferable partnerships between tribes and state governments, such as forest or land management practices on federal and or state land. Really good point, especially given the sheer amount of federal and state lands throughout California. Ayako, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, notes many people of color or POCs don't consider climate to be a POC conversation. I would like to attend a talk that addresses why climate change is an issue that POCs should be thinking of as their own problem. Good point there. I would actually counter that a touch. I think there are more active POC communities that are focusing on climate more and more. I think notably, I've seen a number of case studies that highlight how the Latinx communities, various Latinx communities, have been kind of helping to lead on the climate change discussions. So I think, and I don't mean to say that to say as a way to completely counter your point. I think there are opportunities to address what you just noted, and just want to add that I think there are examples that we can point to. So thank you for that. Another comment from Leah: would love to explore through a session equity considerations, needs, and topics that are coming up related to local research questions and needs in communities. She notes that this is a selfish interest for SGC. I know SGC has their climate change research program, but while that may seem selfish, I think that's actually a great idea to make sure that various research efforts or state programs are broadly kind of factor those equity considerations and needs as they're structuring their program. So it's a good point, Leah. Let's see. Oh man, we're getting a lot of comments. I'm going to try to breeze through some of these other ones. So Jim notes, would love to see the impacts to communities most disadvantaged by climate change portrayed in a way that all of us can see and feel more connected to those impacts in communities. And he highlights an example, seeing some good work on teasing out impacted communities and the intersectionality of impacts, and an example from Scotland's community resilience to climate change. I'll also note that I think what we've heard in the past through CAF and through other channels is, how do we flip the narrative on how we talk about disadvantaged or vulnerable or under-resourced, underserved communities? I think to certainly avoid like a savior's complex, but also to recognize that each community has their own assets that can be leveraged, and there's a lot that we can learn from these disadvantaged communities who are inherently resilient. So yeah, it's a really good point there. Let's see, another comment from Jim: would like to see the landscape of climate justice organizations with a strong equity focus, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color led, who are working in this area already. Seeing how that work overlaps and augments would give us a sense of the strength of our larger community. Oh, awesome. I should have probably saved my comment for after I read your follow-up comment, because I think we're kind of getting to the same thing there. If folks have suggestions for organizations we should reach out to, case studies or projects, or even just contacts that you have, would love to see that come in through the chat. So I won't read through all of those, but keep those coming. That would be great. All right, a couple of more here from William. Yes, good point about including renters. Many homeowners he talks to, they don't see that renters will need any help to deal with sea level rise. Unlike homeowners, they can simply relocate. And then regarding relocation of renters, where would they relocate to, and how would those living paycheck to paycheck pay their relocation expenses? Really good point. Another follow-up from Allison, yes, to William. Her and her colleague were also chatting about mobile home owners who are tenants on mobile home parks or other land that could be sold out from under them. The other aspect, I think, would be considering those who commute to coastal areas to work, because essentially their livelihood could be at risk. And I think oftentimes when people think about coastal communities, they just think of, really wealthy homeowners living right on the coastline. But as folks are noting here, we need to be thinking about renters. I think we could expand that to also think about people who are working in, or relying on coastal areas for various reasons. So, okay, I think we'll take a breath now. Finally got through all the chat submissions. So I'm not seeing anything else coming in. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So let's go ahead and move on to question number 2. On a related note, so now that we kind of heard from all of you on the content side, wanted to hear from you how we can, if you have suggestions for how we can best structure the program to feature that content. So a couple of sub questions here. Should we try to carve out a specific and dedicated track on equity, or continue to try to integrate equity into all of the tracks? And are there ways in which we can actually structure the sessions, like the format of the sessions themselves, that can really allow for these conversations to unfold and to best present the equity topics that were noted? And we have a comment coming in from Natalie. Natalie, I'm gonna unmute you now. Let's see if that worked.
Hi, Julia. It's Natalie from Climate Resolve.
Hi,
Natalie. I'm the Climate Planning and Resilience Manager here. And I want to know if for the California Adaptation Forum, we could have more tours that are based in the community. I think that that sometimes these conferences are a little intimidating, and they're held at hotels that are not so accessible or familiar to people. And I think that someone brought up earlier about wanting to see more of the work that's done in the community. And so I think that has lacked at the other California Adaptation Forums. And things that come off the top of my head are maybe going to see the Ontario TCC community that I know just kicked off, but if there's a tour of what's to be done soon, I think that'd be good. And then one of the local nonprofits in the area, the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice, I know has been doing some adaptation work. And so paying them or offering stipends for them to do a tour of their organization and work, I think would be really good.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Natalie. We will be organizing a local advisory committee. So just as a way to identify those tours, because I completely agree with you. How can we really want to move beyond traditional sessions and think about more creative ways to engage people. So thank you, Natalie. And for folks on the line, if you have ideas for potential tours, let me know. Feel free to chat something in. Here is, and then we have our hand raised from the Reverend. I'll unmute you now.
Thank you. since we're going to be in Riverside, one of the biggest environmental damages being done there is as a consequence of these large warehouses and all the freight coming through. So I think that working with CCAEJ, that does a really excellent work on the ground there, would be good. The other thought I had, and so this is in support of the previous suggestion about tours, but the other thought I had is, wouldn't it be just wonderful to identify where people are already working in solidarity, like in Richmond, California, where Communities for a Better Environment and the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and a bunch of other organizations have already built these sort of teams so that equity and adaptation are not considered to be two different things, but are all part of the same thing. And you could shamelessly steal from what they've already done as an example of success rather than trying to create something new. And with that, I'll check out. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the great work that CV and APEN are leading. It's a really great suggestion. I think to your first point about consequences of large warehouses and freight coming through the Riverside area, that's there's some inherent tension, I think, in terms of how we think about how we shape the program for this event. It is the California Adaptation Forum, and we've heard time and time again from many participants that they want to keep the focus on adaptation and not on mitigation, just because there are many conferences that exist that focus on kind of the mitigation side, whether that's on energy, various aspects of energy or climate action planning. I think with that said, I think there are opportunities to still feature projects and content that hit on, maybe like all three ends of that spectrum on adaptation, equity, and mitigation. So that's a good point there. Definitely in terms of transportation, I think there are some opportunities to think about our state and regional VMT reduction goals through the lens of adaptation and equity. I think there could be some potential there. We have another comment that came in from Eric, Presidio Graduate School. They would be great to recommend for case studies and research projects. Thank you. Any other comments for this one? All right, cool. So we have another comment coming in from Jim. Love the integration approach. Integration promotes tension and transformation. Examples of how you are mainstreaming equity is proof of the value. Tracking it tends to promote siloing. If you believe voices of the most impacted are central to resiliency, then integration is critical. So Jim is kind of speaking to my first kind of sub question around the track. So that's very much so in line with what we heard from the Equity and Tribal Advisory Committee last year. Also very much so in line with what we heard through the first listening session on Tuesday. So things are pointing to integrating equity throughout all the tracks and sessions rather than having that as a separate track. I think it also helps to welcome like new voices who maybe aren't fully working in the equity space to get exposed to these important issues. So thanks, Jim. And then Reverend Coteen just shared, the Moving Forward Network and California Cleaner Freight Coalition. So thanks for sharing that. We'll be sure to look into those organizations. And then it looks like William has his hand raised. So William, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now.
Yes, William Smith again. I'm the co-chair of the Sierra Club's California's Environmental and Social Justice Committee. One of the things I'm thinking that I really like the idea of integrating the equity throughout the program and all the adaptation features. I think there's some value, especially if you can find a really riveting speaker that can demonstrate how all of these things intersect with equity and provide one kind of general overview or one grand overview. Because people tend to get really buried in their silos and their individual issues, and even without the equity, there's so many other intersections between these different areas that it's good if you could find someone to really highlight that as a keynote speech or a main speech one of the days.
Yeah, very good point. We'll definitely want to make sure we feature equity as part of the plenary sessions. We have over the past, I think for 2016 and 2018, possibly actually for the first one as well, I'll have to look back. We did have a specific plenary session on equity more specifically. Definitely like want to make equity front and center through the plenary sessions that reach the full audience. So that's a good point there. Okay, I don't see it. Awesome. Thanks, William. All right, I don't see any other hands raised or comments coming in, so let's shift gears and we'll hit one more question actually. So Allison notes Columbia University's Earth Institute did a good job of integrating equity into their managed retreat conference in July. Awesome, thank you. If folks have other suggestions for conferences that you feel really got it right, please share that with us. It's always helpful for us to see examples of how we can, more targeted examples of how we can improve CAF. So thanks for that, Allison. All right, and then one more comment from, all right, a couple more comments coming in. Since those are going out to all attendees, I'll keep things moving along, but kind of, another point around bringing in an engaging keynote speaker, making sure that they're properly vetted. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so now shifting gears into participation, wanted to identify, what are the priority stakeholder groups and communities we should work to better engage in CAF. So we kind of had touched on that a little bit in thinking about how we define frontline communities. The next question will ask, what are some barriers to participation? So I think Eric, that's where I'll tap you to. Would love to hear from you on how we can better engage students. But from folks on the line, who should be at the table? So thinking beyond, the content and speakers and kind of topics, kind of in terms of who you think should be present at CAF, and how we should identify those priority stakeholder groups. Any initial reactions to that or comments? I can also provide a little bit of background in terms of the groups that we've already that we have been prioritizing. So since I'm not seeing anything come in, I'll provide some more context. So in years past, key stakeholder groups included tribal communities, rural communities, students, and kind of young professionals, emerging leaders. I think on all fronts we could do a better job. We also have heard from, I think, last year's participants interest in better engaging private sector folks to kind of fully loop them into the discussions. I'll stop there and see what folks think. Looks like we have some comments coming in. Hoi Fei notes the unhoused should be more included as stakeholder group as they haven't been engaged in the past and have some connections to organizations who work for and by the unhoused. That would be great, Fei, if you could share that with me. Matthew notes LGBTQIA. Interesting. We haven't actually thought about kind of like I guess like from that perspective. Curious to hear maybe again from you, Matthew, or others on the line, kind of why we should focus on the LGBTQIA community and kind of specifically in the context of adaptation. Just curious to hear more on that. Awesome. Getting a note from Faye on that point. She they can see a connection for barriers in accessing resources or housing. It's a good point. And then Matthew notes, just thinking of different perspectives. Yes, absolutely. A couple of additional comments that we're getting in. William, even if funding is adequate to bring in people with limited means, large conferences can be intimidating for those attending for the first time. Maybe those with stipends could be offered a sponsor experienced, maybe those with stipends could be offered a sponsor experience with how to navigate through conferences. Gotcha. Both the formal program and informal networking. We have heard from folks, we have considered actually last year, but just didn't have the bandwidth to set anything up, some kind of like mentorship or shadowing or some kind of matching service. So getting folks connected before the forum and then, helping to carve out some time during the program for folks to have like a meet and greet. Just to your point, having someone who's attended multiple CAFs or has been working in the adaptation field for several years and matching them with kind of new voices, new faces. That's a good point there. If folks have seen that kind of mentorship matching program work effectively for other conferences, let me know. I know Faye just noted the SEEK forum worked. LGC, Helena on our team organized the SEEK forum last year, did a great job and launched a matching program. So I should definitely touch base with her and look into that. Getting some additional comments. Jim notes groups that have functional focuses like housing, health, elderly, families with young children, low income, local businesses, those dependent on infrastructure. Good point there. Again, if folks have suggestions for groups, let me know. We have a comment from Diana. There's a big effort in Riverside towards supporting local urban ag, particularly to create healthier choices for economically depressed residents. Awesome. Thank you, Diana. I know that there are, I could think of like Huerta de Valle, incredible edible gardens. If there are other suggestions you have for folks you can reach out to, would love to hear that. A couple others here. Natalie noted the Inland Congregations United for Change, which is a nonprofit based in San Bernardino and Riverside counties, doing more work in climate change around San Bernardino's airport air quality concerns. They empower people of faith, youth, marginalized communities by teaching community organizing and providing them with the tools to revitalize and transform their neighborhoods. That sounds like the exact type of organization we want to be engaging with and feature. So thank you, Natalie, for that suggestion. We're getting a number of additional suggestions, Natalie. I appreciate that so much. I won't read through everything. And then another suggestion from Jim as well. And then Matt notes some stakeholder groups engage include public health and healthcare practitioners, decision makers and funders to help them prioritize equitable adaptation policies and investments. Really good points there. I think last year we had a couple sessions that touched on health and climate, but I think we could have certainly done more. So that's another area that we're going into the program development process with in mind, like really elevating that climate health connection, health equity, and other aspects of public health. Diana also notes the highly impacted north side of Riverside has received a $3 million urban greening grant. Awesome. That could be a potential tour. Appreciate that suggestion. Don't see anything else coming in, so I'm going to shift gears since the next question is somewhat is related. So wanted to hear from folks, what are some key barriers that need to be addressed to encourage participation? So of course, cost is a barrier. What we've done in the past and what we'll continue to do this year is recruit sponsors who, recruit sponsors specifically for scholarships and continuing to build out our scholarship pool. That's kind of one. I know there was another point mentioned around maybe like that matching program to help orient and support new attendees. I think that's a good point. Are there other suggestions? Eric, I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you wanted to jump in, I'll first give you the opportunity to raise your hand, just so I don't unmute you and force you to say anything. But feel free to raise your hand if you want to touch on the student piece that you were mentioning before. Any other ideas or suggestions here? Awesome. All right, Eric, I will go ahead and unmute you now.
Hi. Yeah, so the student piece was just an idea. I know that we've engaged in a few different conferences, and usually it has to go through with sponsorships with other organizations that come to these type of conferences. The main thing I wanted to bring up was the space of students really engaging in this area, especially along the UCs and a few other universities that I've seen in California. More of a comment than a recommendation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. We do have a student rate. It's, of course, funding is always a challenge. I think there are certainly opportunities to better engage students and kind of young emerging leaders at the forum. I think there are other conferences who are really trying to do that as well. If folks have seen anything work well, would love to hear that. And William, looks like your hand is raised. I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Well, in my work with housing, with the communities that are stressed, many of them, there are few of them are very articulate and leaders, and they are easy to interact with, but you can really expand the range and the views you get if you can sit down and talk with people one-on-one and help them articulate their feelings and their problems. And so they don't often have much training or much exposure to that. So it's very useful. And that's again another thing that a mentor could help with there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, William. Really good point there. I think what we've tried something a few years ago when I used to manage the Seek Forum, and we set up a few tables in like the main display space area where we had like specific topic focused experts available for folks to utilize really and ask questions and things like that. I can't remember how successful that was, to be honest, and how if people really engaged in that. But I think that's a good point there. How do we leverage this time where people are all gathered in the same place and really maximize, just capitalize on that, on the potential there. I have another comment from Jim, it looks like. What relationships across our communities do we have or need to build? Relationships are the basis of empathy and accountability. How do we make our relational resources visible? That's a good point. I think what's been challenging with CAF is it's almost a reflection of kind of the adaptation field in California. It's almost like a snapshot in time. So, for example, some of the session organizers have a really hard time identifying, people from more diverse backgrounds or from frontline communities to invite to join their panel because they're not actually engaging with those leaders at the project level. That's been a challenge that we've been slowly working to address. It's I think we did a much better job last year for sure for making that really clear. And I think just it's a reflection of how practitioners are kind of evolving their approach to, partner with CBOs, add them into the contract directly. I don't know if that if that helps to answer some of your questions, but I do think that's a good point. You know, how do we make our relational resources visible? Highlighting partnerships has been something that we've done throughout the years. I think that's something that we'll want to continue to do. So yeah, that's a good point. Other questions, other comments? We have another comment from Diana: provide low-cost registration of community members and not agencies. So that's a really interesting point, Diana. And that's something that we actually struggle with, because there is, okay, I'm gonna say something, and if you disagree, I want you to jump in and correct me. But here's kind of how I've been thinking about CAF's intended audience. Because of the limitations just in terms of space and size, to keep the forum more affordable. You know, for the 2020 forum, we're still, you know, we're going to be working on figuring out the pricing structure, but what we're hoping is to either keep the public agency, NGO, and student rates the same, if not slightly lowered if possible. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I think last year the rate was like around maybe 500-ish for NGOs over the course of 3 days, which is actually pretty cost effective compared to a lot of other conferences that we reviewed, where, you know, rates go up into like the 700, 800, 900s, if not more. Our approach has been really focusing on practitioners. So, you know, that including all of the different fields and disciplines that I kind of noted up front at the beginning of this session. And it's kind of as a way to, it's almost like achieving economies of scale, focusing on different types of practitioners who can then, you know, share and learn at the forum, and then take what they hear and learn and apply that in their work as they engage with community members more directly. With that said, we have had sessions where community members without affiliations have been invited to speak as part of a panel. I think that's really powerful and something that we want to do. In terms of broader audience, that has been a challenge for us, and not necessarily our main focus. But again, curious to hear from others. You know, maybe we need to rethink how we're thinking about the primary audience. Yeah, if folks have any comments on that, I'd love to hear from you. We do have a couple of other comments here. Paying a stipend as well as travel and living expenses for CBOs. Often they don't have the spare cash or time to participate in forums. He's heard CBO leaders and members mention this time and time again. Absolutely, I think that comes to another, well, we will have a scholarship application process. With that said, it does not allow for, it does not provide like stipends to cover their time. We really focus on trying to cover the direct expenses of attending so that we can enable as many people to attend as possible. So, but yeah, with that said, I think there are opportunities to potentially engage with maybe other agencies or local organizations who do have the means to maybe support, you know, CBOs from their own community or region. Something that I'll try to explore a little further. Natalie notes that I think a challenge is needing internal training of government representatives. We have GARE, which is the Government Alliance of Race and Equity, and need to get more people trained on this and on implicit bias or similar things. We ask government representatives a lot of times to do more engagement with, you know, quote unquote, climate vulnerable or disadvantaged communities, but they do so with a narrow lens of climate change without acknowledging historical racism, redefining, redlining, disinvestment, et cetera. Does that make sense? That does make sense. It's really kind of like that institutional, yeah, like the institutional processes that need to be changed, and just a lot of capacity building that's needed. I'm sure many of you might be seeing this play out in your communities. I think, we've seen a much larger focus on community engagement across public agencies. I think a lot of this is, due to various state legislation, like SB 1000 really comes to mind. With that said, what we often see and what we often hear is these are one-off events. The people who are attending aren't necessarily reflective of the communities in terms of diversity and background. They are very focused on like a single topic, such as a climate action plan or whatever project is funding that outreach, rather than thinking more comprehensively about building more authentic relationships and yeah. So I think that will be, I can imagine that to be a focus, at least a session or more at the forum. If folks have any case studies or suggestions for agencies who are getting it right, that would be great. I think I have a couple examples somewhere floating around in my brain that's not as accessible at this very moment, but would love to hear from folks on the line if you have suggestions there. On that note, getting a couple of comments in response to that. Thank you, Natalie, for bringing that important point up. William notes, thank you, Natalie, for describing that barrier. Government representatives do need to acknowledge and consider the larger context of life in that community. Absolutely. I think that also gets to, is poverty inherently an adaptation issue that we need to address in order to help communities build adaptive capacity? I'm hoping that we can feature that piece throughout the forum. Another point from Sarah, echoing Natalie, was thinking of offering a training, or thinking offering a training would be helpful as well. Past new partners for smart growth conferences. That's another conference that LGC organized, actually. We did offer a GARE training in the past. I think that could be another opportunity there. Awesome. And yeah, Natalie shared some ideas for Long Beach. Thank you. Faye notes, BayCan is thinking about how to better institutionalize this, understanding with local government staff. Definitely, that's fun to look at. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to keep things moving along since we are, and can I just say, I'm loving the level of engagement. It looks like we're probably going to get close. We probably won't be ending early, which I think is good news for me, so I can get as much input from all of you, and hopefully good news for all of you too. So let's keep things moving. So this next, these next two questions are kind of, so again, CAF as a conference, as an event, is a snapshot in time. It's a single gathering, right? But there are opportunities to better leverage CAF, either leading up to it or afterwards to catalyze action, to support kind of the broader movement around equity and justice, and kind of bringing on new champions in that space. So wanted to see, in addition to everything that we covered on this call, are there any additional or other key barriers to note, barriers to advancing equitable adaptation from a variety of perspectives? So what we're hoping to do, like, this is a much broader question, and kind of want to hear from you about these key barriers so that we can keep that in mind to think about how we structure CAF sessions or content in a manner that ideally would address some of these barriers, whether that's, raising awareness about them, highlighting solutions to tackle these barriers, or providing the space for folks to kind of come together and think through how we can address these barriers. Any thoughts? All right, getting some hands raised. Try to take these in order. Jim, I think I saw yours go up first. So Jim, I'll go ahead and unmute you now. You might be muted on your end.
You okay now?
Oh, perfect, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I loving this conversation. You know, I think it's difficult without seeing the stories of people that are impacted for people to move out of their bubbles and their perspectives. So I think lots of exposure, lots of making it concrete of how people are being impacted by hearing those stories is a key barrier, you know, or that's a key enabler. So something about a mechanism that allows those stories to be heard, whether it's, you know, systemic diagramming or whether it's just people's actual stories, I think is a really powerful way to create empathy and awareness and start to feel connection.
Awesome, really good point there. I think you're spot on. Storytelling is not just a great way to kind of tackle this question here, but it's also a great way for people to actually absorb the information through storytelling. So yeah, I think we'll definitely look into that. So next, I think it's over to you, William. I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Yeah, Jim hit it good. Stories really help a lot, but we do need to make connections because the people in the foothills are going to say, why should we pay for those people that wanted to live on the water? And then the people on the water are going to say, well, why should we pay for those people leaving the hills in the fire? So then we have the other problem, which is that we're willing to pay when fires burn areas over and over and floods, areas flood over and over. The government, the federal government pays to rebuild them too. So that's not a attitude or a help that helps people really adapt for the long term because it's not sustainable. That's a major barrier there as well.
Awesome, thanks so much, William. Really good points there. Matt, I'll pass it over to you next and I'll unmute you. Oh, you're unmuted, go for it.
Thanks so much, Julia. You know, interestingly, one of the things that's been emerging here at the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative is that we have many people who would like to be taking bolder action on adaptation, and our funding structures make that very difficult. You have people in the public health world who would like to be advancing health equity solutions, and the lack of dedicated funding sources to pay for the staff to focus on that work seems to be a major barrier. There's one or two people in the entire Bay Area in the public health agency world who have climate as part of their dedicated list of responsibilities. And so we're interested in figuring out whether there are more dedicated funding sources that can be created that allow for the staffing of public health departments to more deeply engage in the climate health equity intersection. So perhaps something we can partner with LGC on in the year ahead.
Yes, would love that. I've heard of Bar High time and time again, so I know you guys are leading some really great work. So yeah, stay tuned on that. Great point. Also touched on the importance of funding, which will always be a priority for us to address. Any other comments from folks on the line before we move on to the kind of final focus question? It's also related to this question. All right, I'm not seeing anything come in right now. The next question is related, so I'll go ahead and pivot over there. So yeah, how can we leverage CAF to increase overall engagement? And I would say overall engagement and progress towards equity, to various equity, justice, inclusivity, and diversity goals. So you know, that comment around highlighting stories is really getting to what we're, you know, is an example of the type of responses we're looking for, kind of more specifically, you know, what are some more specific opportunities? So a couple of an example from last year, we worked with Resilient Communities Initiative to organize a workshop, an invite-only workshop for CBOs and funders. So to really help, help to just provide a space where folks can connect. And so that was one thing that I think we want to continue next year. Another idea that I had that I think jotted down late one night, it was one of those, like, as you're falling asleep, you have this idea and you jot it down and put that in my notebook. An idea that I had was, you know, I think something that a lot of organizations struggle with is the makeup of their own leadership team, whether that's like their board of directors, or for a lot of the collaboratives and coalitions we support and engage with, the makeup of like their committees and their leadership team. You know, I was thinking, is there a way to encourage kind of more urgent action to diversify their kind of decision-making bodies and leadership teams, maybe like almost like a contest, you know, who can make the most progress on this in 6 months, and, you know, maybe there's like a free registration. I will note this is totally like a dream thought that I had, but just to highlight a couple examples there. I'm seeing some comments coming in through the chat. So getting a speaker recommendation from Natalie, thank you. Since that went out to all attendees, I won't read that out loud. Jim also noted, to what extent might CAF 2020 broker relationships among the organizations that you are in connection with? Use your position as a hub to build connections among those folks. Great point. Wow, for some reason, I didn't quite think about it from that perspective. I mean, LGC does sit in this position where we're kind of coordinating, you know, with so many different people from different sectors and fields. And we kind of talked about the mentorship side, which is kind of one way, but then it seems like, Jim, you're kind of suggesting, you know, what opportunities are there for us as LGC, as the organizing, as a forum organizer, to help bridge those connections. I think that's a really interesting point that I want to explore further. William also has a comment to expose younger audiences to concept, concerns, and approaches. Video stories are far better than print stories. Follow the leadership of the Twitter in chief. Great point. Yeah. I'm trying to. I think there are definitely opportunities there. I'll have to think through how we can best achieve that. And maybe, you know, maybe partnering with organizations who are already producing those types of video stories, and just leveraging CAF as a way to amplify and further disseminate those resources. And you know, Eric, to your point, or kind of thinking back to what you mentioned around the importance of engaging with students, there could be some opportunities there as well. I'm even thinking like, hey, could we engage with UC Riverside or CSUSB, their local colleges? Like, maybe there could be some joint projects that, I don't know, like film students or video students, design students can work with like environmental policy students, and to come up with something. Yeah, I think there's some potential there. Natalie shared another potential speaker. So looks like that got shared out. I think that's a great idea. They also noted they have a connection to the San Francisco Urban Film Festival. They've done participatory events around film and storytelling with urban focus. Awesome. That would be, yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. That really speaks to what I think William noted. All right, I'm not seeing any other chats or comments coming in, so I'm just going to shift gears and just have this open-ended comment up or question up. If there's anything, any additional input you want to share in response to any of the questions that we touched on or anything else, would love to hear from you. While we wait for maybe some hands to go up and for comments to come in, I'll also note this won't be the final time. We are going to be administering a pre-forum survey probably sometime next month. We'll keep that open for at least a month or so for folks to provide additional suggestions on topics, on speakers, networking opportunities, tours, and open-ended feedback as well. So this certainly won't be the last or only time to provide input. But yeah, I don't see anything coming in. Natalie had a tour idea with Inland Empire Waterkeeper. Good, awesome suggestion. I think I'll give folks another like 20 seconds. Some of you might be typing out some responses. Can you tell that sometimes I get a little awkward with silences and just fill it with noise. Okay, it looks like we're not getting anything else coming in, so I think we can go ahead and start to wrap up. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. I definitely encourage folks to subscribe to receive CAF updates if you aren't already. Due to our policy or privacy policy, we're not able to add people directly for our CAF list, so definitely encourage folks to subscribe if you aren't already. And I definitely, can't thank you all enough. Jim did ask a question here, wondering why I chose the webinar format rather than a conferencing format with breakouts to harvest every voice more effectively. I know the trade-offs, but have found it possible to use that format over Zoom with groups of close to 100 through various structures. That's a really good point, Jim. And I'll be completely honest, I did not, I could have probably put much more time into thinking about how to best structure this. We essentially replicated the format that we followed last time for the 2018 forum. We just had a single session. This time we wanted to open up at least 2 opportunities. We are tracking other responses coming in, and if we might open up a third session if there is sufficient interest there. I think that's a really good idea of utilizing the breakout group feature. There's also a polling feature that I think we could have utilized as well to make this more engaging. So that's a really good point. I always welcome feedback on even just how the overall format of this session was. We're always looking for ways to improve it. And Jim, I think those suggestions are really great ones that we'll want to follow up on. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much. We've received an incredible amount of input from folks. So now our job is to look through all of that and make sure that we are moving into the real planning and program development process with all this input in mind. I will be working on pulling together summaries from both of the sessions as well as raw input. We won't be including who said what, just to respect everyone's privacy. But we'll be sharing that out hopefully next week, again, as a way for us to hold ourselves accountable. That is the name of the game here. Can't just gather input and then do everything behind closed doors. So stay tuned for more on that. And I think with that, we'll wrap up, give folks a few more minutes back to your day. Thank you all so much, and we'll hope to see you in Riverside next year.